Hey there guys, welcome back for another episode of Mortal Realms Monday, where for today's episode we are looking at painting the Lord Executioner that came with issue 23 of the magazine, and you can find the review for that magazine up in the top right hand corner just at the screen here. So first of all, I've gone and primed the model with a white spray paint. This is from the Wilkinson store in the UK, the Wilco. It's their own brand of spray paint. Now it's not a gloss, it has more of a satin finish to this spray paint, so you'll notice as I'm painting the black up here that some of it doesn't quite want to adhere to the paint to start with, although it does a little bit later on. You know, it just takes a coat or two to get it on nice and even, but the satin is something that I wanted for the effect on the ghostly part of this model. So all I'm doing here is with the Abaddon Black, I'm just going around all the areas that I want, obviously in black. So that's all of the robe and hood here, and also the axe head. So I'll just get on with painting this, and we'll be back in just a moment. Okay, so once all the black has dried, I'm now taking some Dawnstone, and I'm just giving a nice dry brush over all of the black hooded area to give it a bit more of a grey tone, and to pick off those edges, and just leaving the black in the deeper recesses. Now for this I'm using a filbert brush, which is essentially a flat brush with a slightly rounded end, so more of a curved end rather than a point. It's still a flat brush, it just has that curve over the end of the bristles. Okay, and next up I'm just taking some Ulthuan grey and just very gently dry brushing over those raised areas, just to add one more step of highlight, and then focusing a little bit more on the face. The rest of the area will be left that Dawnstone colour. Okay, so now that the hood is finished, it's time to start working on the ghostly part of the model. And for this I'm just using some super thin down Incubi Darkness, just thinned down with some water, you know, nothing special. And I'm just starting about a third of the way to halfway down the model, and then pulling backwards towards the robe or the hood, so that it deposits the majority of the paint up the top there. I'll then quickly dip into my little clean water pot at the top of the screen there, and fade off the Incubi down into the white. So basically what I'll be doing is essentially removing the excess paint just by dipping into that pot, wiping it on the palette just to get some of the water and the paint off, and then just smoothing that out down along the bottom, and then obviously trying to do the same on the inside. A little bit more difficult getting up in there with the paint, especially to fade down. Obviously on the outside I'm starting from where I want the fade to end, going up to the darker, but it's a little bit hard to do that with the brush on the inside as you're pointing the point up towards where you would want to finish. So with the inside I'm not too fussed about getting it, as long as I can get, you know, some colour up in there and then some fade a little bit further down. Now this does take a good 6 or 7 layers, each time starting a little bit further up the model, so that we get a little bit of a nice gradient, and then it always going back in whilst that's still wet and just thinning it down and fading it into the previous layer. So you can see here it's starting to build the colour up in the recesses and up toward the hood of the robe there. I will say this has got to have been, so far with the Mortal Realms magazine, and probably, you know, throughout my time painting miniatures, this has to be one of the fiddliest or most difficult to paint models, purely for the fact that it wobbles everywhere. You'll notice here that I'm constantly having to try and grab the bottom of the ghostly parts to stabilise the model a little bit, so that I can paint without it wobbling all over the place. But obviously once we work down towards those tips, that becomes a little bit more difficult to do, and then once the paint is on there and I'm painting other parts of the model, trying to hold on to that area without, you know, rubbing that paint off, it's a little bit of a nightmare to say the least with this model. Lovely model, but definitely a fiddly one to paint. Okay, so next up I'm taking some Aethermatic blue here, and I'm thinning this down quite a little bit with water, and you can see I've already applied. I did forget to hit record on the camera while I did the first layer, so I've let that dry and I'm now going back over, and all I do is trying to blend this into that Incubi Darkness. And you can see that I've already got the blend started there, and it's just a case of layering this up. Again, like the Incubi Darkness, starting a little bit higher each time and just blending that together to get a smooth blend from that darkness into the Aethermatic blue. Okay, so for the ghostly part coming off the axe, and also the faces that are swirling around the top there, I wanted them to be slightly different to the executioner himself, and so what I'm doing here is using a 50-50 mix of Ulthuan grey and Nihilakh Oxide, and just thin that down ever so slightly with a bit of water, and I'm just applying that over all of the ghostly part here, and then slightly up onto the axe head there. So just a one coat with this, just to get it nice and even on there. With the axe head I will go back in later on and sort of touch up over that, but we'll get to that a little bit later on. Okay, so I'm now taking some Ulthuan grey, and you can see I just wipe on the painting handle there to remove some of the excess, and I'm just going over the ghostly part of the executioner just to pick up some of those edge highlights and brighten up the tips a little bit more, so we take away from that Aethermatic blue a little bit, going from a nice Ulthuan or pale blue going up to the Aethermatic blue, and then up into the Incubi Darkness, and then using obviously that same grey just to pick off some of the edges on the ghostly part at the top there. Okay, so now I'm taking a 50-50 mix of Athonian Camoshade and the Aethermatic blue, and I've added to that about 5 or 6 drops of Lamian medium, just to get it to flow into those recesses. And as you can see, I'm just painting this over all of that bluer, sort of blue-grey ghostly area, just allowing this to sink into those recesses and stain that blue a little bit with the green, just trying to get rid of the bubble that was in the mix there, and then I'll pull that away out of that recess in a little bit. But the idea here is, like I say, it's just to add some shadow and shade into this blue tone. Okay, so now I'm taking some Rhinox Hide, and I'm just going to use this to paint in all of the wood frame that he has on his back here. So having to hold the model by the figure himself, just to try and reduce that wobbling a little bit. You can see here that the paint doesn't want to take to start with on the satin finish there, but there's no problem with the paint coming off. Once this is finished, I'll go over with a varnish anyway, and that'll seal it all. It's just the first, with the bit of water that's in there, the first coat doesn't always want to take straight away, but a couple of thin coats, 2 or 3 thin coats, and there's no problem there. Alright, so now I'm taking some Leadbelcher, and I'm just going to paint this over all of the axe head and bring it down slightly onto where I have the Nihilakh Oxide mix, and just let that thin off slightly. You see there, I'm just thinning it down with some water just to get that over the top and blend the two. It doesn't have to be a perfect blend, as I will go back over that with the Nihilakh Oxide and Ulthuan grey mix, and get that looking so that the blade is blending into that ghostly essence. And I'll also apply this to the bangle, or the cuff that he has on his wrist there, as well as the metal bracket at the top of the wood frame there. Okay, so now for the hangman's noose and the wraps or bandages, whatever it is that's holding it, strapping it to his back. I'm just taking some Tau Light Ochre and just giving it a single coat over the whole thing, and this will provide a base for the wash over the top in a bit. Obviously being careful not to get this on anything I've already painted. Okay, so I'm now taking some non-oil and I'm just applying this over all of the metal areas. So that's the blade of the axe and the bangle and the silver or the metallic brace up the top of the rope there, and also over the black hood, just to smooth off some of that dry brushing, some of the marks that the dry brushing can leave, and to just dull down the highlights ever so slightly. Okay, and for the rope and the bandages here, you can see I'm just applying a quick wash of some Agrax Earthshade. Right, and now the non-oil has had time to dry. I've mixed up a little bit more of the Nihilakh Oxide and Ulthuan grey mix, and I've thinned it down so that I'm able to almost dab this on, and it'll give a sort of blotchy effect. It's a little bit hard to explain, but what I'm trying to do is get that blotchy effect so that the outside edge of it that fades, as it dries, will blend into that metal slightly. And then what I can do is concentrate, repeated over and over, the blotchiness, concentrating it on that harsh line that I've got there, and fading it up the blade. So it will fade that line into the Nihilakh Oxide that is further up. And what this will do is, obviously, as the metallic will show through that, some of that slightly, that will give a bit more of a blend from the axe head into the ghostly smoke. So here you can see I'm just concentrating it on that that harsher line. It does dry fairly quick, this, because of the way it's being applied. And you can see as it dries it dulls down, and then I can go back over. And obviously this is double speed, so this is 200% speed, and you can see that eventually I do start to get there. Okay, so I'm now taking some white scar and just giving this a very light dry brush over all of the ghostly greener areas. As the brush disappears off the screen there, I'm just wiping it again on the handle just to remove some of the paint, and then going over the top and dry brushing this in, just to pick off some of those edges. And because it's slightly because it is very dry, some of that green still will show through, and it's not going to show up as a bright harsh white. Obviously if you go over multiple times it will, but all I'm looking here is just to get a dusting, just to highlight some of those edges up and bring that green into a little bit more of a paler edge up on the ghostly parts there. Okay, so I'm now taking some Kislev Flesh, and I'm just edge highlighting all of the bandages or wraps, whatever they are here, just to obviously pick out some of the edges here, and then with the rope just carefully lining the thicker banding on the top there for each sort of part of the rope, and then just a bit of a dry brushing over the lower half. So picking off these ones and then trying to pick off the other ones, but to be honest they are so small that for a model like this I'm not too worried about picking them out exactly. If this was more of a centerpiece, then obviously I'd go in there and be a lot more careful with it. You can see here I'm just picking out the thicker ones and then dry brushing, or just slightly going over the thinner ones, just to add a little bit of highlight to them. Okay, so next up I'm just taking some Doombull Brown, and again using my painting handle to remove the excess. I'm just going to give this a liberal dry brushing over the top. This will pick out most of the flat areas and the highlights, and it will leave that darker brown down in the recesses. Okay, and I'm now mixing up some Skrag Brown here with some of the Doombull Brown and a little bit of the Tau Ochre, just to get a lighter highlight. And I'm just concentrating this a little bit more on top of the wooden frame here and just fading it off as it comes down, so obviously the light is hitting the top and then not catching so much further down the wood frame. And just a little bit on the bottom. Obviously we want some on the darker area, but nothing quite as bright as we do on the top. And then just doing the same on the handle of the axe here. Okay, so now I'm taking some Stormhost Silver and just edge highlighting parts of the axe here, obviously along the top where the light would catch, and some of these sharp edges. And then the same for the metal cuff that he's got on, and the metal brace at the top of the frame, as well as going around and picking out all of the rivets with this as well. So being careful now, holding on to the model, obviously I don't want to rub any of the paint off here. So just edge highlighting everything and then picking off the rivets, and we're almost done with this model. And finally, I'm just going to add some rust effects to the blade and some of the metal areas. And for this, I'm just using a roughed up brush that I use for stippling, and just stippling on some Mournfang Brown, and then I'll follow over the top of that with some volcanic orange from Reaper Paints, as well as some Skrag Brown that I have on the palette here, just to give it that little bit of a rust effect. Okay, and that brings us to the end of today's video. So first of all, thank you everyone for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to give the video a like, and if you're not already subscribed, hit that subscription button and ding that bell for notifications of further videos. Obviously Mortal Realms Monday, focusing on the Mortal Realms magazine every Monday, as well as the Indomitus series, focusing on Warhammer 40k, starting with Indomitus and then expanding into 40k once that series is over. So yeah, as I said, there's the finished model there. Sorry for the angle of the camera, it slipped when I was recording this little sequence, but there you go. If you're not following me on my other social media, click the links in the description below and go follow me on those. And until next time, take it easy and keep painting those minis.